Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. Today, episode 95, nearly to 100. We are at Friday, March 4th of 2022. We're going to do a little COVID news today, but I got to tell you, we're ramping down. We kind of imagine the summer will be a lull. We hope it's the last of it, but we're basically going to track what's happening with hospitalizations and deaths, watching for the fall of both of those. We'll give you that news momentarily. Right after that, Jeff Rinvelt will be back with us to remind us about the Undemo Day coming up. And after that, the third installment of our Market and Customer Discovery series, an often overlooked part of the product development process. Today, I'm joined again by Jonathan Fay of iCorps, who's going to be telling us about the iCorps program and his approach to customer and market discovery. So it's going to be a fun day here. Let's go to the COVID metrics and vaccine distribution, although we're going to have to take that off because we're not going to be talking about vaccine distribution today. Just tracking things like positivity rate, now down below 10%. The deaths still haven't dropped. So that is not great news, but we do expect those to lag. It's about as high as it was in April of last year. Hospitalizations, though, well on their way down, almost back to last summer's levels. And here's that nice combined graph that really does tell the whole story. Hospitalizations dropping, deaths have not yet, but cases coming way back down again. Great news out of the University of Michigan Health System. We have only 34 people hospitalized with COVID. We have 6 of them in the ICU and only 3 on ventilators. So that's looking really good. Similar at Spectrum Health, there are 14 on ventilators there, but the number is certainly dropping. Really great at Henry Ford, 58 inpatients, only 2 ventilated. So wonderful news there. Like we said, we will just spend a few seconds at the beginning of the show now from here on out to just track the drop in deaths and hospitalizations so we can all be thankful as that is going away and hopefully not to return, but we don't know the future. So as things come up, we will talk to you more about them. In an upcoming week, we're going to be talking about FDA guidances. Among those guidances, if you're a company that responded to the emergency use authorizations, what do you do now? Those are going to start going away, and you can expect that they'll start going away soon. We'll be talking about FDA's planned guidances for folks in that situation. So as COVID news comes up, or as we get a better retrospective on what actually happened over the last 2 years, we will certainly talk about that, but thankfully from a retrospective perspective at that point. I want to welcome our friend and advisor, Jeff Rinvelt from Renaissance Venture Capital, back to the show. Jeff, there he is. Your house always looks sunnier than wherever I am, but I'm led to believe you're in the state of Michigan.
I am in the state of Michigan. I'm in Ann Arbor, but yes, it's the good news is it's not on my face too badly right now. So yes.
Well, you look great, and you always have something hang. It's like a meme or something. There's always something new hanging in the back of your shot. So you have done a magnanimous job over the course of the pandemic at keeping the background fresh. I love that. You guys have a fun event coming up. It's the Undemo Day. Tell us more about this, and you've got a new slide here for us to see this week.
Yeah, perfect. And I appreciate all the work you've done to get the word out. So I wanted to come back and sort of say a little bit about Renaissance, for the people that, just tuning in. Renaissance is a venture capital fund of funds. So that means we invest in venture capital firms. And part of our mission is to attract those venture capital firms and show them the best deals. And we've been doing Undemo Day now for about 10 times. We've done it, 10 different times, but this time we tried something different. We're going to attract all the ones we're just attracting ones in the Midwest, and we're also just focusing on diverse founders this time. So if you're a diverse founder or CEO and you're in the Midwest, this is for you guys. And we've had a great response from the investors so far. So we're over the number we sort of thought. We're actually over 100. And I know I've got sort of a really small slide up there that shows all the different investors. But if you're looking to attract to those investors, we would love to have you apply, guys. And that application link is still open until Monday. and we may actually extend it by a little bit, to make sure we sort of get everybody in. But you've got your weekend there, and we'd love to have you apply. And again, if you're a community member or investor, there's still there's still going to be a lot of room for you guys to once we get all these great companies in, for you guys to get one-on-one meetings. And we're also going to have some open events, basically, where people can network, and also we'll have some great speakers, and there'll be more to come on that. But biggest message right now is, if you're a company that wants to meet with anybody on that slide and are in the Midwest and diverse founder or CEO, we would love to have you apply, because we think we're going to have a couple, hopefully more than a couple of great deals done at the end of April 27th.
That's awesome, Jeff. So what should these companies expect? They're going to come and they're going to pitch in one of these two virtual pitch rooms. And then what does follow-up from something like this look like for these companies?
Yeah, these meetings are intentionally quick. Basically, they're sort of a 10, 15-minute get-to-know-you meeting. And then usually after that, there's a number of due diligence meetings. It's not unlike pitch deck, basically, where you pitch for half an hour and you get $1 million. These usually go up and they have multiple meetings, and then they're usually brought to the investment committee of those venture capital firms. And then if they pass that, there's actually a term sheet done. And then after that, there's actually much more due diligence that even happens, and can kill a deal. So it is a rigorous process, but as an LP, I like that, because I want to make sure we get the best deals done, and we do the best investments. But this is just the intros, and we've had some great success just from making intros. I think we had like 15 deals done in just the state of Michigan last year off of Undemo days, and we're hoping to have a lot more as we open it to the Midwest.
Yeah, that's really great. And so if you're a diverse founder and you're sort of wondering, how do I get there? Do I just cold call all these investors? This would be far, far better than doing that. Just come and you're being welcome to be heard.
Perfect. We'd love to have you.
That's great. Jeff, thanks for being here. Thanks as always for all your help and support.
Yep. Looking forward to hearing from Jonathan. See ya.
Yeah, we are too. And with that, let's actually welcome our friend Jonathan Fay, who runs the iCorps program in the Midwest. And he just recently took a position with University of Michigan Biomedical Engineering. He was with the Center for Entrepreneurship and was with us last month talking about medtech and higher education. Jonathan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Gene. I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, it's great to see you. I think we did that thing that they say you have to do in showbiz. We left them wanting more, because I got some comments afterwards like, but Jonathan didn't talk about iCorps. I wanted to learn about market and customer discovery. You guys were just talking about like how to teach people about medtech. This isn't what I came for. So we're back to do that today with the market and customer discovery series. But at least you're loved when they want to hear more. So
yeah, it's funny because whenever I get on stage, people always like, he's going to talk about iCorps because that's what he does.
Yeah, we thought we were going to shake it up last time by having you talk about something other than iCorps for once, but now everyone wants to hear about it. So that's great. I guess for our audience, let me have you just really briefly, Jonathan, talk about your role and your new position in case somebody is watching this episode that hadn't seen the previous one.
Right.
And then we'll make this flow into the discussion we've been having over the last 2 weeks with our other guests about market and customer discovery. Then get into some of the nuances that you bring to the table in your processes. But remind us of your role and your new role at the U of M.
Yeah. So for me, the big thing that's happened is you may have seen the news that, iCorps, the University of Michigan, and several of our partners, we won a much larger award this year from the National Science Foundation or last year. And with that, the iCorps program I think it's going to either quadruple or quintuple in size throughout the Midwest. So the program is getting a lot bigger, a lot more complicated. And then in some ways, being executive director of the Center for Entrepreneurship in the engineering school is no small job either. So I had to kind of make a choice. Really wanted to know, should I go with iCorps? Should I stay the executive director? And really what I decided was that, iCorps is kind of my first love. And I'll stick with that program and try to really shepherd it across the Midwest and Great Lakes region. And so with that, I also got an opportunity to go back to the BME department. My PhD is actually in biomechanical engineering, And they asked me if I'd be willing to come back and help them stand up some new master's programs that they're considering, and really help them think about translation very broadly. So I'm really excited about that because, my roots are all in med tech. And so going back there is kind of like going home, and it feels wonderful and comfortable. So I'm really, really happy to be doing that.
Well, congratulations on that, and also congratulations on the, I guess, quadrupling of iCorps. That's pretty
Yep.
that's pretty cool.
Yep.
So for our audience, we've been talking the last 2 weeks about market and customer discovery. This year on MedTech Crossroads, we really felt like we needed to back up a little bit, not only doing more series work to talk about things in a more regimented manner, but to actually examine some things that over the past year and a half, we hadn't really examined. One of those, Jonathan, you joined us for part of the discussion on higher education. How do people even get into this industry, let alone making successful companies and products? But then this whole question of market and customer discovery. As you and I have talked, and as others have talked, if anyone is out there thinking you're going to do a startup, you're going to make a product, you've invented something, you're going to invest in it, it doesn't matter. You can't ever do enough market and customer discovery. People will remember that we talk all the time about user needs from an FDA regulatory standpoint. And man, you miss those, you're swimming upstream. But I don't think there's any startup that ever got a product out there that said, oh, we did enough market and customer discovery. There's often hiccups, there's often headaches. Coming down to, I thought we were solving the right thing, but we discovered something along the way. And that's why this is so important. Some of the things that we've talked about in previous weeks have been market and customer discovery for more established businesses, which is maybe ironic because many people are talking about new product development, but we talked with Kevin McLeod from C2DX. We had the folks from My Lead Consulting on here talking about their early stage process of it. But Jonathan, I mean, with iCorps quadrupling in size, it's got a reputation for being the place of how do we go out there and talk to people about our product. You notoriously put academic folks in very uncomfortable situations, getting them to have to talk to other humans about their ideas and their product. If we take a step back from market and customer discovery and we say, what is it and what are the common misconceptions about it? Where would you take us?
Yeah, so I think it's always important when I talk about customer discovery for the audience to recognize my context for like, what am I trying to get done with customer discovery? So, unlike say a mature company or other people, most of what I'm trying to do is I'm using customer discovery, starting with say a raw technology, right? There's no actual product. There's not even a solution there. We're just dealing with a new discovery, maybe a new scientific phenomenon that's been discovered, or maybe a new algorithm or something. So we're very, very early in the kind of the innovation pipeline. And so if you understand that's my context, then a lot of what when we're talking about customer discovery, it's really helping those scientists and engineers understand in the world where that new capability might be useful. Both commercially or maybe to solve some kind of societal need for a nonprofit. It doesn't really matter. We're just trying to find where that new thing has value and value that can be capitalized on. So that's a lot of how we're using customer discovery. And so when our audience first kind of thinks about it, when we first talk about customer discovery, the first misconception that they're thinking about is, oh, I just need to go talk about my thing and see what people think, right? That's what we're going to do, right? So in our language, we call that selling, because academics, they actually sell all the time, right? They're selling to try to get new students. They're selling to get research grants. Like they're used to selling. So believe it or not, so you have to.
They got to write all these grants and stuff. It's a big pitch.
Yeah, no, it's just a giant pitch. That's all it is, right? They got a certain format, the way that goes. So yeah, it's you don't have to. The first thing is like you're not trying to convince me whether you're right or wrong. Like that's what you're not. I don't really care if you're right or wrong. I'm just trying to understand what the world is like the challenges people have, the problems that they face, and then you go back and you have to assess, does my technology actually matter in the context of this person, right? Can I actually make their life better or not? But that happens behind the scenes. That doesn't happen when you're talking to the customer. When you're talking to those stakeholders, you're just trying to understand their life, and what they're facing and the issues with that. So yeah, so I would say that trying to get them past that kind of instinct to immediately put their thing on the table. So usually the second misconception that comes up right away after that, it's like, oh, so I'm not supposed to sell. All right, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to ask the customer what they want. What do you want me to do? Right. And so this falls into this trap that, most customers are usually really bad at telling you what they want. They'll either give you something that's like a Star Trek, tricorder, right? Something that's impossible, or they will give you what they have with like sprinkles on it, right? So just some small iteration beyond, right? And so it's just hard for them to imagine what a new state might be. And so we try to, again, get people like, don't put the customer in the seat of trying to co-create the product with you. Your job, again, is to go back and discover, what is their life like? What are the issues? And you know what? As they're telling you the story, they might not even realize that there's a problem there, but you might see the problem, right? Or you might see how their life could be different. And so they may not even realize that it's a pain point for them, because you're the one that, once you piece together all the puzzles, you're like, oh, this system could be different if we did it this different way. And then you have to talk to the stakeholders to figure out if that rearrangement's actually possible. So
I'm not
I would
going
say
out
those
there.
are the two biggest ones.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Finish that thought though.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to say that those are the two big ones, right? I'm going to go out and sell my thing, or I'm going to just go out and ask my customers what they want.
What I love about that second example, Jonathan, is it's really a form of negative selling, right? It's not actually out of the domain of selling. It's actually the domain of selling, just not specifying the solution, but coming and saying, "Tell me what you want." I remember years ago, we used to do wedding photography, and we discovered that it was far, far better to come and say, "Here's the things that we can normally do for clients, but if you want something special, tell us," versus saying, "What do you want? We can do anything." And it fell on dead ears. So it's almost worse in that case to just say, "What do you want?" You're really sort of calling for empathy, aren't you, at some level, to enter into the user's situation and to understand, like you said, maybe even the things that they don't understand.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And it's also understanding how the different experiences those individuals are having link together. Like, it's amazing to me how sometimes you'll talk to one stakeholder and they tell you their needs. But if you really do what we call your ecosystem map well, and you understand all the different people and all the different perspectives, in some ways, sometimes you have more knowledge about what the other people want and don't want than the people in the system themselves. All right. And so you can potentially see solutions that they won't be able to, because they're too busy doing what they do, right, to worry about how all these other pieces go together.
Yeah, how they all fit together. That's an interesting call for a very broad-ranging discussion within this discovery process. So you move away from saying, I want to build this, are you okay with that? Away from saying, what do you want me to build? And to just this very broad-ranging exploration. But nevertheless, you're approaching this with some kind of an order to it. There's a way that you go about this. Tell us about some of the phases that you teach and that you take people through.
Yeah, so if you don't, I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah, go for it.
I think there'll be some good things in here. So can you see that, Gene? You all set?
There it is.
Okay, there it is. All right, so this is obviously a very kind of top level framework that I first introduced for people. And again, remember, I'm usually talking to academic scientists and engineers. And I, it's a three-legged stool. So there's one thing, if you want to do innovation, there's like the technical feasibility. What can you do? And that's usually where we're starting. And then the other two bubbles, they've hardly spent usually any time thinking about. One is the stakeholder desirability. What problems can they actually solve? And then there's the kind of the economic viability, right? Is this sustainable? And there's lots of different things that we try to walk them through as they think about these different questions and probing these different questions. And the big thing I try to get people to understand is that you're not going to have all the answers at the beginning, but your fidelity on each one of these answers is going to increase over time, right? Because if you try to get all the answers up front, well, because there's kind of an interplay, because as you learn about stakeholder needs, you might have to go back and do some technology testing to see if that's possible, and then go back and refine. So there's lots of back and forth and iterations in this process. But as you think about desirability, technical progress, and the economics, I like to break, kind of the innovation process into 6 steps, right? I call it ideation as the first step, gaining insight, product research, product development, market launch, and then market scaling. Unfortunately, what I've seen a lot of is people try to jump from step 1 to step 4, right? They're like, oh, I have an idea. I think it's great. I'm going to start building the product prototype, right? I'm going to start building prototypes that kind of look like the product, right? And that skips steps 1 and step 2. Steps 2 and steps 3. And those are really important, especially in situations like medtech, where a lot of time and money has to go into product development. I mean, taking on a medtech product development cycle is no joke, as most people on the call will know. I mean, it takes a lot of money to bring up a product to market. So you really need to make sure you're on the right track before you enter step 4, which is where like the true kind of design control product development cycle might begin. And there's some earlier things we can do. So here's a bunch of things that I've listed that kind of go into each one of these buckets at these different phases. And then to kind of keep order, I like to think about customer discovery as having kind of 3 big phases to it. In the first phase, we're really just trying to do technology problem fit. What is the technology? What is the new capability? And what problems can it actually address? So if we can kind of get a sense of that, then we can move technology and kind of mature that a little bit to a point where it's actually a solution. Like, what features does it have? And what kind of different things might it do? Or what parts does it need to have, right? And we're moving from these problem space to actually specific customers that have those problems, those specific stakeholders, right? And making sure that whatever we propose, the solution actually solves the problem for the customer. And then once you kind of get that, then the solution can start to form into a product, right? A specific thing that you can actually monetize and sell. And customers, those specific stakeholders, morph into a market, because we've got to find more of them. And we have to make sure that we have a repeatable sales model, which then forms the market. We need groups of customers that look similar that can actually adopt our product. So I like to talk about technology moving into a solution, moving into a product, and problems morphing into customers, morphing into markets.
Yeah.
So that's how and you're going to discover, all along the way.
That's a great breakdown. And so you're starting out here, and this is why you don't go to a potential customer who you're trying to do customer discovery on and say, here's my solution. You're saying it's that
Right.
first bin, the technology problem fit. And you're not even sharing the technology. You're just saying, okay, do I really understand your problems? Or is that something that I still need to do more work on? I guess, do you sort of just, what do you do with the technology at that point? You just leave it on the table. You just keep it in your back pocket and almost pretend like you didn't invent anything?
Honestly, yes. Although I do try to ground the conversations. We try to teach people, there's kind of this Goldilocks thing when you're doing customer discovery. You try to ground the conversation with the stakeholders somewhat around what you're doing. So let me give you an example. So this is actually an example from a real team. At one point, I think the team was working on a new type of stent, cardiac stent, that had a sensing capability to try to detect when restenosis was starting to happen or where there was buildup inside the stent. And so we said, okay, don't pitch your technology, don't go sell it. And they're like, okay, great, we got it. And so we read an interview that they had done with the cardiologist that they sat back and said, all right, tell us the problems in healthcare. And I applaud them for their effort of not diving too deep and starting generally, but they started a little too high, right? They learned a ton about the Affordable Care Act at that time, right? It was brand new at the time, and the doctor had lots of opinions about that. but they didn't learn anything that was really all that relevant to what they were doing. And so they needed to figure out how to ask a question that said, okay, so, maybe you ask the cardiologist something about revision surgeries or having to go back in afterwards to really try to explore the problem statement, or, walk me through the full life cycle of a patient so you understand all the things that the doctor's doing with the stents as you go forward. Or why did you choose this stent? Maybe probe some of their decision making. Like, there's lots of different stents on the market. Or you could even maybe probe the restenosis problem, right? And see if they think that's really a problem these days. Or, I think at the time, the drug-eluting stents were just coming out, which kind of took care of most of the problem. So, teaching them that kind of right level of question to ask, to have that broad conversation, but still get relevant information.
Let's see if we can drill into that just a little bit more, Jonathan, because I think it's a really important point. Because at this point, we've all heard, okay, so even the person you think you're talking to may not be the person with the most interesting comments about the market space. And so be open to hearing from whoever it is that has the insights that you need. Don't talk about the technology up front. But then we hear, but don't ask too generic of a question. And I can imagine the frustrated entrepreneur going, what are you saying? Like, make up your mind. Which is it? And I think you're getting into something really important here. We heard asking questions around the domain that you think you're solving a problem in without getting too deep. Is there another example you could give us, or a way we could clarify that better? Because I think that's a really important point. I don't get to just walk in and say, tell me about cardiology, because I'll learn all sorts of interesting things that are completely irrelevant. But I also don't walk in and say, do you need to solve this problem right here? So
Right.
how do I find that balance? Maybe another example or another way to look at that.
Yeah. So when I'm trying to teach people how to do customer discovery, of course, we're also teaching them that you need to have a hypothesis or something you're trying to learn when you walk in, right? You're not just walking in as a blank slate and just trying to learn whatever. You should walk in with a plan in terms of what you think you want to learn. And so generally I say that what do you want to learn about falls into a couple of buckets that kind of helps people understand what they need to ask. So the first one is understanding workflows, right? Like in the case of the cardiologist, how do patients come in? When did they get identified? How do they actually then get triaged to which ones actually are going to get stents versus which ones are going to get these other treatments? So you're really just trying to map out and understand in great detail how patients get triaged through the system and all the different people that they might see along the way. So that's kind of a workflow discovery process. Purchasing decisions can be another interesting way to probe it. Like, oh, I see you're using the Johnson & Johnson blah, blah, blah stent. Okay, so how did this hospital decide to do that one? Or do they only do that one? Or do they do these other ones? And try to get into the details of how did they actually arrive at that decision to carry this stent and not that one? And who was involved in that process, right? And again, you're trying to draw that map so you understand it. And then it gives you other people that you can go talk to. And then you can also then start to say, I've got these maps now. Okay, when I introduce my thing, does anything on these maps have to change? Are there winners? Are there losers? And then that's going to form some really interesting detailed questions that you can then follow up on and figure out maybe what the barriers might be to your thing, or what the motivation might be to adopt your thing.
And you can imagine quite the conversation coming from that. How did the hospital choose to use this stent? And you're likely to get a, well, yeah, Dr. So-and-so who does this in the department. And you're going to get half an hour on that one. That's going to be a very fruitful question.
Yeah, and you'll understand who the real champions are. Anyone who's gone through the hospital purchasing cycle, and I'm sure many people on this call have, it takes a lot of effort by a lot of people to get through that process.
So we're out there, we're doing customer discovery, we're talking to users, we're open to users that we didn't even realize were the ones we needed to talk to. We're asking questions that aren't too generic, but they're certainly not selling, and they're not just creating a vacuum. They're digging in the areas that you think you need answers. And you're finding stuff out. Here's the hard question. What happens if you kind of go along that path and you discover that you don't think your technology is solving their problem?
Well, I will say there's what we hope happens, and then there's what actually happens. Um, so what we hope happens is people realize that, this idea that they took in, or this technology, it probably just needs to be changed, right? You probably need to go back to the drawing board, and hopefully along the customer discovery way, you have a much better sense of the problem, and you can invent something else, right? It's not the end of the road. You're just going to do something that's better or more interesting. Fantastic. That's a win. I would say that a lot of the times, people's self-investment in the invention that's in front of them is high. So it takes them a while to kind of internalize that and realize they need to pivot or move in a different direction. And I think that's just human nature, that they'll keep plowing down the path, and eventually reality will set in, and then they'll pivot. But it can take some time for that to happen.
Well, and it's very interesting.
It's hard.
Because what we're basically saying is sometimes we're more attached to what we think the solution is than to meeting the need. And that's kind of what this whole exercise is about, is to identify what that need is, to truly empathize with and bring value to the users. And it does often bring us to a reckoning. It's like, am I actually doing that? Is this actually achieving that? So I think that's an important point not to overlook, is sometimes that pivot can and should happen even at that stage.
Yeah, and I think what's really hard, I've seen this a lot with clinician inventors, right? The doctors know that this is the solution that they want, right? I'm the inventor, this is the solution that I want. And so they're not only emotionally invested in it, they believe at their core that this is the right solution to the problem that they have. Even if the customer shows them that the wider market, that's not what they need or want or believe that they believe has value.
Yeah.
That can take a long time to get that ship turned.
Yeah. We actually have a question in the chat here from Ken Spencer, and we can either talk about it now during this technology problem fit, or we can talk about it as different parts come up. And we can get Ken on audio too if he needs to clarify the question. But he said, can you drill down a little more on contrasting value propositions versus product features? And we're not talking about the product yet, so that's why I say we may want to hold this to a later thing. But if I understand correctly, in terms of contrasting value propositions, sort of this realization that, oh, maybe I'm discovering different things. So let's talk about this part of it first, then we can talk about it more, and then we can see if we've answered the question. But I'm going through this customer discovery, I'm going through this technology problem fit, but now I'm discovering that there's actually different value propositions I could solve, but maybe I can't solve them all with the same product. How would you think about that in this stage one technology problem fit area?
Yeah, okay, so there's a couple of different things going on here. So if you're having conversations with people about their workflows and things like that, you want to make sure that you're uncovering where the value to them is, not the how. So one of the other interesting things that happens that I've noticed in healthcare discovery is that, again, surgeons in particular will generally talk to you about features. I want a thing that has this, that, and blah, blah, blah. You as the discoverer have to then extract from that. You were just presented a solution. They basically said, I want this solution. You have to take a step back and go, okay, they told me about a solution. I'm not sure if that's the right solution, but why are they telling me about that solution? What is the value that solution that they've talked to me about? Like, what problem is it actually solving for them? And so you have to kind of do that behind the scenes, right? To extract that up one level to why. Why is that an important thing that they've mentioned? Why was that the solution that got mentioned to me? And I think that'll also, once you understand kind of those different values, I think you'll be discovering them all over the place, right? And so then the question is, well, what do I want to build, right? What do I want to do? And then you kind of have to figure out what's that minimum set that gets you over the bar of getting adopted, right? Because again, I could try to add everything into my product and, hey, meet all these people's needs. But boy, that's expensive. And that takes a long time. I mean, to be honest, I'm an engineer, so I can say these things. Like that's the old phrase. Remember, you got to shoot the engineer before you launch the product, right? That's the pit of despair that we as engineers fall into. We try to add too many things, and we're like, oh, could be better if we do this, that, and that. You got to hold yourself back and say, what is the minimum set of things that I need to get into the marketplace? I know my first product is going to be incomplete. I know it's not going to be perfect, but it has to have enough value to be adopted. And what are those key things, and which ones are kind of nice to have, right? There's this magnitude scale, like which ones are like the shark bite issues and which ones are just kind of it's kind of annoying, but it's okay.
And I guess we have to be open to the idea that maybe our customer discovery could lead us to the realization that we talked about before, that number one, what we thought was a product solution isn't, but also to the idea that we may uncover problems that demand multiple solutions. And maybe then the question becomes, which of those am I going to pursue with the limited resources that I have?
Yep, absolutely. And you'll also get ones where if you got stakeholder viability and you got economic viability, you may find that there's a clinical need, right? There's needs there, the stakeholders want it, but if you really crunch the numbers on the dollars, it just doesn't make sense to solve the problem, right? And that can be heartbreaking because you can see the patients you can help, the stakeholders want it, and there's just no way to actually make it sustainable at the end of the day, and you just got to walk away.
This is a society or business thing, not a should this solution be there.
Right. Exactly. So that can
huge.
happen too.
Well, this is great. And Ken, thank you for the question. We'll come back and see if we've answered it in just a little bit. Jonathan, I want to get through, especially point number 2 and point number 3 of you threw the 3 phases of customer discovery up there. Let's talk for a little bit about that second phase, the customer and solution fit. Describe that part to us.
Okay, so if you've got this technology and then you've got this general class of problems and you kind of understand how the people, now the next stage is really focusing on those individual stakeholders, right? What do they need from the solution, right? In order to adopt it? What are all the different pieces? And so I think one of the key things to recognize is that there are some things you're going to do, they're going to create the value, and that's going to be the reason that they buy. But the other thing is there's a bunch of other things the customers require in order to actually adopt it. And these aren't the reason they buy, but they're kind of exclusion criteria that if you don't have it, they can't buy it. Like it has to have this kind of internet in connectivity. It has to be this voltage. It has to, there's this laundry list of specifications that the customers will have to have in order for them to push it through their system and adopt it. And you have to kind of discover that, because then you understand all those different interconnects and you won't end up tripping over one of those later. And you get far down the stream and someone's like, hey, wait a minute, does it have blah, 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 blah? And you're like, no. And you're like, well, it doesn't work with our ERP system. I guess we're done. Right. And then you're going to have to go back.
And at this point, have we told them what we think our solution is at this point?
So I think at this point, you are starting to talk about kind of the vague shape of it, right? You maybe you don't have a product prototype. Maybe you have a sketch of how it might flow, or different mock-ups that you can show different people. And you're really kind of presenting that to them to get feedback. I think that's one of the things, actually, I don't know if you guys caught it, but I have this in product research. When we're doing solution customer fit, I put MVP, or minimum viable product, in there. What's funny is I put it in the desirability line, not in the technical line. Because a lot of the times the minimum viable product is an instance you're using to probe stakeholder needs and or how they do their work, not necessarily reducing technical risk. It may not be on the line to the product. It may be some other offshoot that you're using to probe the customer's life. And so you are introducing those in that phase to try to sort that out and refine what your solution needs to be.
Here's my black box. If it did these things and these things and these things, how would you feel about that? And the customer says, well, that's great, but we don't have that voltage in suite or whatever. And now,
right. Or is the box that big? Because I don't have any place to put that box.
Yes, a common one. Or, oh no, I'm not going to add another alarm to my floor. Exactly. Yeah, very common.
Or I mean, I've seen cases where it's like, oh, is the box that small? It can't be that small. We'll lose it. right? Like we have trouble with like this and that equipment like walks off and then we don't know where it is. Like there are some real things that happen in healthcare settings that you need to be aware of, that can really change what you're building.
Well, and of course, that was one of the things as molecular diagnostics came along and things like that, and some things that we've experienced in the past. You know, you go talk to people on the floor, and they say exactly that. Like, no, I actually don't want this as small as possible. And in fact, if it doesn't happen like that, it's going to the central lab anyways. So I don't really want your invention on my floor. It's just going to clutter things up and get lost and get stolen. So no, actually, we'd rather send
or
it to the
even
lab.
worse, right? I got my new point of care device. I do it, beep. I got my reading. I'm not qualified to read it. The patient knows I got a number, but I don't know what it means, and I'm not qualified. You know, I got to send it to the central folks anyway to tell me what to do, right? And now we got to figure out how to make that data work. Like, so there's lots of things in that workflow that you can trip over.
And that gets to the very society of what a healthcare system is, which I suppose we could do a whole nother show on how do you evaluate and make changes to something like that, which is a fascinating question. Okay, so I've got my idea, but I'm keeping it completely mum. I go talk to who I think the users are. I ask them questions that are close, but not all the way. And I discover that there's other people I should be talking to. Then I come to phase 2 and I'm starting to say, hey, you know, if I had this thing and it kind of did this, how would you feel about that? And people are giving me feedback that allows me to grow my product concept. But now I've got to go to phase 3. What's phase 3, Jonathan?
Yeah, it's phase 3 where you're really buttoning down what it is you're going to build. What are the actual specifications? You can really tighten up what you think your cost estimates are at that point. You're in some ways in design control speak, you're really defining the design inputs at that point, right? You can write a requirement for all the different stuff that needs to happen at that stage. Now, there's always uncertainties left. But you have a very clear idea what you're building. You have a very clear idea that you'll be able to do it, both economically, the stakeholders will like it, and quite frankly, there's still a ton of engineering left to do to make that thing appear and make sure it's working the way that you think it should. But man, you've reduced a lot of the risk at that point.
Well, there's a lot of product development efforts that really only start at phase 3, and they say, well, we've got to write a technical requirement, and we've got to, understand broad market dynamics. And they've basically skipped phases 1 and 2. So I think if there's anything we're both advocating for here, it's phases 1 and 2 need to exist, and if they don't, right, phase 3 isn't gonna happen correctly. And yeah, that's where the product development aspects actually start. There's an interesting aspect to that, though, which is that you're starting to talk about market in phase 3, I think on your slide, versus just customer. And you have a very simplifying way to talk about the market versus the customer.
Yeah, so to me, a market is made up of a bunch of customers that act and behave similarly, right? So this is the idea that you've got to start working through, like, okay, in customer discovery, you usually got a couple of really good examples of people that like what you're doing or have the same problem and you think you can solve the issue for them. But then you got to somehow get from those kind of anecdotal numbers to how many of them are there in the world and how would I get to them? And yeah, it's easy for me because I can talk to the people at U of M and maybe Henry Ford or Beaumont, but I don't know anybody in Kansas that could buy my thing. So really understanding how you're going from the people that you've talked to in that kind of sample group to the larger market and how many of those people are there, right? So that's the point where the investors are really, they're going to ask you that, right? Like, how many of those people are there and how much are they willing to pay? So it's hard to answer those when you don't really know some of the early stuff. So
I don't think a lot of people necessarily connect those two worlds. Oftentimes products will get invented on the basis of one person's, even a clinician's idea, and they think, well, I'm a customer who knows my world and this is what it should be. And then if an investor says, I need to know what your market is, they go out and they find, as we were talking about last week, some secondary research, which can be very, very valuable. And they say, here's my market, but we haven't actually we haven't painted the picture of what's in between an N of 1 and the entire size of the potential market. Those are actually connected. I love how you said it, as a market is just a whole bunch of people who actually have the same need and think the same way, and we can estimate would behave in similar types of ways. And so then I guess the question becomes, if I recognize that I'm an inventor and an N of 1 isn't enough, I don't represent the market. But if I bring in 3 of my friends, it's better, but we
Better.
don't represent the market yet. How do you find the place where you kind of say, yeah, I think but between the primary and secondary research that I've done, I think I have enough information to start this. When do you say, yeah, I think I'm ready to take the next step? You don't want to go into analysis paralysis and spend 10 years researching the customer and the market. When do you say enough is enough and you go, knowing that you'll never talk to everybody in the entire market?
Yeah, I think it probably, well, it's hard to throw out a number because so many products are so different and the size of markets. Like, my last company was Earlens. There are 400 otologists in the US, or there were at the time. And through our SAB, we probably knew 200 of them.
Wow.
Right? So you can get a pretty good sample size that way of opinions. And other markets are much bigger. There's much more broader. Like if you're trying to do something for GPs, it'd be way harder. And so it's a difficult question to answer. But I think you talked about primary research and secondary research. So secondary research for me is really like the market reports. I just use them as kind of a BS meter, right? Like if I do my primary research and I tally up kind of like how I think this works and I get to a number, and then I go to my secondary research and they said the total market, and they got a number that's 10 times smaller. I've probably screwed something up in this. And so I need to be able to really reconcile those two reports. One of the issues, though, that happens a lot with secondary market research is it's much higher level, right? Like you're going to get, I don't know, how many cardiologists there are in the United States. But that doesn't tell you like how many cardiologists that are doing the thing that you need done, right? That usually is a lower level, and that information is generally missing. The other thing that's often hard is like, what kind of setting are they in, right? Okay, I got cardiologists, but cardiologists at U of M behave differently than those in a community hospital that behave differently than those somewhere else, right? Or maybe care in the US is different than it is in the EU or Southeast Asia, right? So, sometimes it's hard to tease out all those kind of subsegments from the market reports relative to what you're doing. So I do think as an entrepreneur, you really have to do that bottom-up model. But a lot of the secondary reports can give you numbers to cross-check yourself, or numbers that maybe you don't have that help you scale from your anecdotal evidence to the actual market.
Yeah, so we might look at a secondary report to maybe get an idea of what we think markets might be, but like you said, at a bottom-up approach, you'd rather use that as a reality check to show if you've found the right path.
Right. So for example, you might do something like the market report told me how many cardiologists there are in the US. But through my anecdotal evidence, I went to a couple of institutions and I realized, well, really only 20% of the cardiologists at these places do what I need to do. So really my market, I got to take 20% of that number that's in that other report, and I'm going to get to a reasonable number. All right.
Yeah,
so
that's a really interesting perspective, because I think a lot of times people go find the numbers in secondary research and they say this is what it is, and you're actually advocating to not only not start there, but not even take that as the gospel truth. It's more, this is the research that I've done and this validates it. That's fascinating. Right. I want to get to one more question before we run out of time here today, and this has been absolutely phenomenal because I wanted to make sure we outlined these major phases. We are living in a world that is just ripe for change and is changing whether we want it to or not. Everything is volatility everywhere we look. Oftentimes when you're doing market research, especially in medtech, one thing you mentioned earlier, especially with surgeons, for example, oftentimes change comes hard. But we just saw recently with COVID and the emergency use authorizations, like a market just got made there for a few years. It just got created out of whole cloth.
Yep.
Not to go into the debate about whether cloth or, no, I'm not going there, masks are good or not. Right?
Right.
But I guess when you think about the market that you're evaluating, this group of potential users, how do you know if the market is asking for a change or if it's stagnant? Is it better to be in a market that is a big market, or is it better to be in a small market that's asking for a change? How do you think about that? Because the volatility can be a blessing, a curse. The size of the market can be a blessing or a curse. How do you wrestle with those questions in your market discovery?
Yeah, I think the way that I think about those choices, especially if you have a technology that can go to multiple markets, is I like to start with the strength of the value proposition to the customer segment first. How strong is it? Because if you said, I had to laugh, I think when you said, is this market asking for change? Most markets are not asking for change. The people in them will continue to do what they did yesterday happily, right? That is the status quo. And so in order for you to get the actors to do what you need to do something different, right, what you're asking them to do, you either need to slot right in to what they're doing, or the value and in either case you need value, but the value you need to kind of rearrange the parts is going to be huge. It has to be huge, right? So you have to really understand the strength of that value proposition first. And if it's not that strong, or it's a nice to have, or you're getting the sense it's a nice to have, you should really take a step back. Now, it doesn't mean it can't go forward, but for example, it might mean that you're not a venture-backed startup, right? But you might make a great version 1.1 of somebody else's product, right? So it's just, maybe the path to commercialization has to change because the value isn't there to capture.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like your anecdote that they're not usually asking for change. The kinds of things where markets are asking for change are exceedingly rare because people find what works for them and they go with it and they don't really want to move.
Nope, they really don't. And then the question will come up at some point and about, again, how many people are there? How much money is at stake? Because you're going to need piles of money to do the development, and you're going to have to go to people that, like the people that Jeff funds, and you're going to have to convince them that you're going to be able to return more capital than you took in, a lot more capital than you took in. And so there is a limit to then how small of a market you can go.
To be able to
and then, of course, if you can figure it out, maybe you can do the development differently. Maybe you can go to a little smaller investor, or there's other ways of building partnerships. Or maybe you start and you have a small company, you take a little bit of investment from SBIR or some an interested angel, you get the technology, then it goes to a bigger company. So there's lots of different pathways things can take, but you have to understand the strength of that, the market size, and understand which one of those pathways is actually viable for you.
All good things to be looking into, and all this nuance as to how to structure this kind of customer and market discovery. I think this is invaluable. I just want to check back in here. I think we got to most of the things that was in Ken's question about contrasting value propositions versus product features, realizing, like you said, sometimes you got to shoot the engineers. You got to identify what the value proposition is. If it's multiple, you got to pick one. You need to limit your product to that. There was one more interesting point that I wanted to touch on, Jonathan, and you described to me when you and I were talking earlier, key stakeholders. You're going to talk in phase one with everybody you can talk to. You're going to try to get as many perspectives as you can. But you described, you said everyone else is a no person who can stop you from pursuing your idea. But not necessarily, not everybody is your buyer. So I've got no people who can stop me from pursuing my idea, but I also have buyers, and they aren't all the same person. As we go out today, just give us a 1-minute description of this. I think it's a really important point for our audience to hear.
Yeah, right. So you're going out and talking to all these people, and what we try to have teams think about is there an actual value proposition? Is there a reason why this human wants you to succeed or fail? And sometimes the answer is there's so many people involved, like someone buried in purchasing, that doesn't really care, right? They have their job to do. And so as you're going through and defining your solution, you have to make sure that you don't do something that makes their life uncomfortable or harder to do, because they're not gonna stand up in the value added committee and go, yes, we need this thing. But behind the scenes, they're gonna like, we can't do this because this is screwing up my system. And there are no people, right? Remember, I talked about that laundry list of things that you have to do that aren't really the reason why you're being purchased, but you have to do anyway. The no people are on that list, right? They have certain things that you have to do to satisfy and keep their lives kind of at the status quo, honestly. And then there's other things you're going to do for different stakeholders that are really going to champion what it is you're doing and kind of separating them out. Right.
So that seems like a very important point, that we often think of stakeholders or key opinion leaders, but to differentiate between those who have an opinion, whose opinion could stop my forward progress, versus those who will actually proactively advocate for my product and who I can see as those key opinion leaders who could drive adoption of it. That's a really interesting point, because it tells me I should be talking to everybody, but I have to understand how far I can take the opinions of which type of person it is I'm talking to.
Yep. Yeah, and understanding their position in the organization, in kind of, what authority they have or what influence they wield.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point. This has been a great overview of, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do customer discovery, these 3 phases, the technology problem fit, the customer solution fit, the market product after that. Understanding that the market is really made up of customers. How far do I go beyond myself and my friends? Got to go some distance. How do we find that? How do we validate that market need? We've certainly been given a picture of that today. Yeah, and I love this last idea we're ending with understanding all your stakeholders, but understanding what role they play. It's a phenomenal thing. Jonathan, I'm so thankful for you and what you guys are doing at iCorps, and I'm going to give you the last word to take us out. What's the thing that should be just in the top of our minds when the words customer and market discovery go across our brains?
I think you hit it right actually out of the gate. I think it's empathy, right? We're just building empathy for others in terms of what they experience on a day-to-day basis, and that we as innovators and entrepreneurs are trying to make their lives better. And really understanding how to do that. That's what customer discovery is all about.
Well, that's great. Jonathan, thank you for being here today. It's always good to see you. Always a pleasure talking about things. You're a wealth of thoughts and information. Appreciate having you.
All right. Thanks, Gene. A lot of fun.
Thanks again. Thank you all for being here. We will keep it open for 30 seconds just in case anyone has an announcement or something happening in your community or in your business that you want to tell us about. We're happy to get that word out to the community. So feel free to raise a hand if you have any comments or announcements of that sort. We'll keep it open for another 10 seconds. And not seeing those, I want to thank you for being here. Next week, Eric Van Middendorp from Spectrum Health Innovations rounds out our series on market and customer discovery, and will be telling us about a new program that has been ramping up between Spectrum and Beaumont, allowing commercial access to clinicians to do things just like customer and market discovery and user needs acquisition. So we'll be talking all about that next week on MedTech Crossroads. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.